Southway. This is Sean, and I'm here today to continue our series looking at God's love. Taylor talked last week about just how expansive a topic God's love is, so even though we're going to be going through this for many weeks, we're not going to cover every aspect of God's love that there is. Taylor spoke last week about how unexpected it is that God's love is placed upon us, even though we are sinners. This week, though, I want to talk about a different aspect of God's love. You see, God's love is one of his attributes, and God has many attributes. He has the attribute of knowledge, he has the attribute of love, he has the attribute of mercy, of justice, of holiness. And the great thing about God's attributes is they all work together to make God who he is. We've said before in our Sunday school classes that God is the sum total of his perfections. And we sometimes have a tendency to think of God's attributes in isolation, as if one always overrode the other. Sometimes we think of God's justice, for example, as being contradictory to his love, as if God could be loving or just, but not both. But the amazing thing about God is that the Bible presents him as being both loving and just. I want to read for us from 1 John chapter 4, verse 10. And this is love, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Now that word propitiation means a sacrifice that bears the wrath of God and takes it away. It is the proof of God's love for us that he gave his Son to take away his wrath. But that tells us something. It tells us that his love does not override his justice. You see, there is a cost to our sin, a price that must be paid, and that price is the just wrath of God against sin. And yet, because of God's love, we know that we never have to face that wrath. There's an analogy I like to use to describe propitiation. Imagine that you were a collector of sports memorabilia, and over the years you've collected many valuable objects from different moments in sports history, but your prized possession is a baseball signed by Babe Ruth, one of the greats to ever play the game. And you keep it on your mantelpiece above the fireplace, and let's say you have a friend come over one day, and this friend is a bit of a joker, and he knows how much you value this baseball. And so he picks it up and he starts tossing it around in his hands back and forth. He acts like he's going to drop it in your fireplace into the fire. And he's, in general, just messing with you. But then something happens. Maybe he trips or something, and he accidentally drops the ball into the fire. Well, now your prized possession is ruined. You've paid a good deal of money to have this, and now it's gone. And all of a sudden, you're left with a choice. There's a price that must be absorbed. There's a cost that must be absorbed. Either you can demand that your friend pay to replace the baseball signed by Babe Ruth, which you would not be wrong to do. It was his foolish actions that led to it being destroyed. Or, because you love your friend, you could choose to absorb the cost yourself. You could take the hit and say, I will absorb the price I paid for this object, and I will forgive my friend. Now, God does something very similar with us. There is a cost to be paid for our sin, and that cost is God's wrath. But because he loves us, he satisfies his justice by sending his Son Jesus to absorb the wrath of God on our behalf. It's as if God is taking the hit himself for our sins. And because he's done that, we get to experience his love rather than his justice. And so as we think about God's love, let's think about the cost that God is willing to absorb in order to make us right with him and to welcome us back into his family.